like to call to order the Wednesday, August 15th, 2018 Airport Advisory Regular Board Meeting. We begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Crystal, would you conduct a roll call, please?
Shannon Stebbins.
Here.
Louis Worthy.
Here.
David McNeary.
Here.
Brian Schultz. Jeff Sayer.
Here.
Shannon Hicks.
Here.
Cal Sheehy.
Here.
Steve Johnston.
Here.
And Ken Porosky.
Crystal, can you certify that we have a quorum present? Yeah, just for the record, we have a quorum present.
For the record, we have a quorum.
Okay, a couple of announcements just to start off with. We have a new member who was just appointed last night, I believe. I hope I pronounced the name right. It's Mark Zeef. Also, Mr. Steve Huff, who's been a board member for a year and a half or so, has moved to Henderson, and he's tendered his resignation from the board. So we do have open seats. Anybody there in the audience that would like to volunteer to participate? The first item of business is a call to the public. Under Arizona open meeting law, we'll have an open call to the public for citizens wishing to address the board on issues within the jurisdiction of the board. Your comments must be limited to 5 minutes or less. If you wish to address an item already on today's agenda, please wait until that item is announced for a public hearing. At the conclusion of the open call to the public, individual members of the board may respond to criticism made by those who address the board, may ask staff to review a matter, or may ask that a matter be placed on a future agenda. However, board members cannot discuss or take any action on matters not already on the agenda. Do we have anybody in the audience that would like to address the board? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, which is approval of the June 27th, 2018 meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
Mr. Chairman, motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Unanimously approved. The next topic item broadly is communications announcements and airport supervisors reports. So I'll turn it over to Steve Johnson for the airport supervisors report.
All righty. ADOT FOD grant project is completed. It's under budget. The electrical vault construction project is near complete. We have a change order into the FAA, which they've approved to replace the radio receiver, which is 26 years old. Some of you who have been flying at night have probably noticed that sometimes the lights work and sometimes they don't. So for a number of weeks, we were actually turning the lights on all night. So going out at dusk, coming back at dawn. So that's going to get fixed and replaced. Unrelated issue with the runway 14 reels. They've been intermittent. We have a NOTAM out till July of next year. Now they seem to be working again. So if they are working tomorrow morning, I will cancel that NOTAM. And they're slated to be replaced in 2 or 3 years via a grant from ADOT. The PAPIs on 14, again, had some issues. That was a wiring thing that's been taken care of. The taxiways, which you've all noticed, have been, rejuvenator's been applied. And in fact, painting of the markings happens tomorrow morning. So those are all done, which should get us about another 4 years, hopefully, out of that pavement. The Hangar 24 Airfest is scheduled for October 27th, which I believe is a Saturday. The D2 hangar development's under construction, which I'm sure you've all noticed. City hangar inspections continue. The operations department is creating new airport locator signs. So when you look at the signage out there, which is all faded, and you note that it disappears, it'll reappear in brighter blue here in a few weeks. The grant for the master plan was received, I believe, Friday, August 8th. It's been hand carried to City Hall. I believe it's been signed and returned to the FAA. So it looks like we're on board for $500,000 worth of airport master planning, which probably will start in September sometime. We've been meeting with FBOs, and this will come up in the next report, staff, the city, and the FBOs in regards to some issues with taxiways. And again, that'll come up in the next report. The FAA FAST team did a pilot presentation, I believe, on July 12th in regards to military airspace in the state. We had a representative from Luke, Nellis, and 29 Palms talking about military operations in airspace around us. The FAA ACIP meeting, that's where we ask for grants, occurred on January 24th. We had FAA and ADOT on hand, our airport consultants, the city manager, operations director, airport board chair was there as well, 2 representatives from the city CID division, and our council liaison. It was very successful. The project list has been drawn up. It will be sent out to the consultants tomorrow to input into the state database. The FAA didn't bat an eye at our very ambitious project schedule. There were minor adjustments, but that's all. The project costs were much higher than our annual entitlement grants. That's $150,000 we get each year. The next big project for 19 is designed for a rebuild of the entire length of Taxiway Alpha. That's $225,000. You add to that the next year where we construct, and this is a reconstruct. So this is not an overlay. This is you're going down to the base and you're ripping all that pavement out because it's done. The total project cost will be $6.2 million, which means the FAA is going to have to fight for us to get the money for that. It'll be discretionary funds. So in other words, we're going up against Phoenix, Mesa Gateway, and other big airports in this region. They didn't bat an eye. There were no questions. They seemed very up for it, so it was very positive. A categorical exemption, not for this project, but for, well, actually, for the design. The way it works is you have to have a CADX or an environmental review, then you can do design, then you can construct. So the CADX for this is due October 1st. Talked to the consultant today. They'll be sending over a agreement with them for this CADX. It's about $5,000, and they say they can get it done by October 1, where we get it into the FAA, and we're in the cycle to move this thing forward. And again, the construction, we're looking at 2020, and $5,875,000 is what we're talking about. We'll be working with airport tenants and the FBOs in regards to scheduling this. I would guess a lot of this stuff will happen at night because that's what we've done in the past. The city investment in airport maintenance projects, so this is city funds invested back in the airport, not grant funds, this last year, $75,860. And again, you'll note tomorrow morning they'll be painting out on the connector taxiways. And again, that's the city. And again, I think I'd mentioned this in the past, the FAA is going to be awarding supplemental discretionary airport grant funding, 100%, in the coming weeks. We're not slated for the first segment of this, but there's a second segment. There'll be something published in the Federal Register probably in October, depending on the requirements for that. If we can work it and the requirements aren't onerous, what we're going to try to do, and again, if the FAA will go for it, is fast-track the taxiway project by a year. And again, see if we can't get the federal government to pay 100% to where there's no local match. Again, we don't, and we won't know until the Federal Register comes out in October what the additional requirements are for that grant. Let's see, what else? City staff has been meeting with airport staff. We're working on a RFP for the north ramp for Hangars. We're going through the details on that. I've talked to an appraiser. I have an estimate of what that cost is. So that's working through slow but sure. ADQ has been out to inspect our underground storage tanks. The tanks passed inspection, but based on the signals we're getting, the costs to keep them compliant are probably going to be far more than what they're worth. They'll be 30 years old in another couple of years. The insurance rates on them will skyrocket at some point. So we'll be looking into an AEDQ grant where they pay 100%. Well, one where they pay 45%, one where they pay 100%, up to $45,000 to come out and evaluate the tanks to see what needs to be done to them to make them compliant in today's world, unlike 1991. The next grant you can get, which again, they pay 100%, is to remove the tanks. So the way it's looking right now, just on the signals we're seeing, is the tanks likely will be removed. They will not be replaced. The city is not going to be in the fuel business. We have 2 FBOs that can do that. We're working with a contractor, and then again, this will come up in another report, to install some recording equipment on our Unicom radio, like we used to have a few years ago. And I'll explain that a little more later on. Future airport-funded maintenance projects are going to be completing the crack sealing on Taxiway Alpha, which we started this year, painting the edge lines and the center lines to Taxiway Alpha. The connectors I mentioned, we'll be working that tomorrow. And then repainting some of the tie-down ramps, some of the tie-down markings on the central ramp. And the annual city cost of services process is underway. So again, like we did last year, we're surveying other airports to see what their current hangar rates are and where we rate in that. Any questions?
Any questions from any board member? Thank you. Item 7 is public hearings, and the first is presentation and discussion of airport movement area incursions. And I'll give a brief introduction to this. In May of 2017, the airport manager presented a memo to the board based on complaints that he had received for closing Taxiway Alpha at the north end to facilitate refueling of helicopters. The board unanimously supported his words in this memo, which were that it was not in accordance with federal regulations and it could not be done. Since that time, and it was followed up with a letter to the appropriate parties at the airport. Since that time, Taxiway Alpha has continued to be closed. More letters have been sent, and now we are presented with more complaints about the closure of Taxiway Alpha. So with that introduction, let me open it up for a public hearing. Is there anyone here that would like to speak on this issue? Close the public hearing. That brings us to today, and let me just digress a bit here. Airports in the United States that take federal funding sign an agreement to comply with the federal rules. These rules are presented in FAA Order 5190.6 Bravo, and they're called grant assurances. There's about 39 of them in there. They're not, you have to read almost the whole 600-page document to ferret them out. They're not in a logical order or explained individually. And they're basically concepts. To allow a private entity to close Taxiway Alpha violates at least 4, perhaps 5 of these general concepts, 2 of which have to do with economic discrimination. That would be one. Another has to do with discrimination against a class of user, and that would be everybody else that wants to use Taxiway Alpha or Runway 14. So if we allowed that to occur, then we would be in violation of several grant assurances. If a complaint is issued to the FAA, they will investigate. The first thing that they do if they find that it's valid is they put our grant process on hold. So all the money that we just talked about would be put on hold. If we didn't acquiesce to their directions and not do that, then they have various other things that they can go take action on. In addition, as a result of this, and as a result of the ACIP meeting with the FAA, there were some questions about the distance from the runway for Taxiway Alpha. An investigation, and the reference for this is, what I'm going to reference right now is Advisory Circular 150/5300-13 Alpha. And within this advisory circular, it gives, it's a very complicated advisory circular, and it's meant for airport planners. But contained within this document, they talk about the ROFA, which is the Runway Obstruction Free Area, and they give dimensions of it. We now believe that the runway obstacle free area for runway 1432 at Lake Havasu encompasses the lateral limits of Taxiway Alpha. So if we park something on Taxiway Alpha, we have to close the runway down. The airport no longer meets the safety requirements to have a runway in operation. So if we were told that we had to close the runway for refueling, or the taxiway for a refueling operation, we would have to then close the runway as well by NOTAM. So with that as the background, the airport manager has sent us another memo, and within this memo, he reiterates that the airport sponsor, which is us, the city's position is that we must comply with the federal grant assurance program, and that these federal laws prohibit us from having an individual close the taxiway for a refueling operation. And not only does that, it prohibits us, the airport sponsor, from closing the taxiway for a refueling operation. So that's the background from my perspective of this issue. Any other members of the board would like to comment?
Well, I think everybody is concerned with losing grants and not following FAA procedures, and it's a real relaxed airport. We're non-towered, and I think everybody, gets a little lackadaisical every once in a while. But I've been in a situation myself where I've taxied out and had cones appear on the taxiway. No aircraft, but it interfered with me continuing to the end of the runway. I had no idea what was going on, and I couldn't get anybody on the radio. So to me, as a flight instructor, it's a safety issue, and it's also a little bit offensive that my taxiway, because it's my taxiway too, is just closed for no good reason. When I found out what was going on and that this has been continuing, it wasn't like a one-time thing or anything. That's very concerning for me as an airport tenant, as a citizen, because it's the city's airport, and I think we all need to share it and use it. There's got to be a good reason. There's plenty of tarmac space available to accommodate special fueling circumstances, from what I understand. And Steve could correct me if that's not the case, but I'm hoping this is, a moot point at this point. It's been kind of rectified, and that everybody can agree to that.
Within the proposal that the airport manager has submitted to us indicates that there's over 10 acres of public ramp space available, to include the north ramp, parts of the main ramp, and the ramp at the terminal building. And he is now available to the commercial users at the airport 24/7 if they need to get access to those areas. And they have free and unfettered access to any refueling operation that they want to maintain. So I think that from my perspective, the city, the airport sponsor, which is the city, our hands are tied. We have federal law that says we can't do this, nor can we allow it to be done. But on the same, without just trying to be punitive to someone, I think it's important that we have space to offer them, and we do have space to offer them, to conduct a refueling operation. Any other comments? Now, one last time, is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak about this? Tom, please state your name.
Thank you, Tom Stokely. My hangar's at the north ramp, so every time they pull in those helicopters, it's not too bad with the single rotors, but they bring the twin rotors in there. It shakes a lot in the buildings, let me tell you. And there could be damage to your buildings, it's that bad. I mean, dust comes down, pictures I have up there just sitting on the purlins are falling down. It's very rough. And I really think that North Hangar is not well suited, North Hangar area where that little parking area is, the way it's laid out now. My personal opinion is the lights need to move, make a wider access so they don't have to come close to the hangars. I think there could be some changes there and maybe something that we go after in the future. Because what they do is they come around, they come right next to the hangars, and everybody is on the north hangars, no. They're all shaking their head, yes. They all have the same problem. And the dust in the areas that we can't dust, all over our birds. So, yeah, and his fire extinguisher came off the clip. So these are issues that maybe we need, if they're going to use the north hangar, and I realize there's a big competition between the fueling companies. I'm in the gasoline business. I own a convenience store. I know if I could stop the highway and shovel them all into my store, I'd be really happy. But so I think, you know, and I've seen them out there on Alpha, fuel truck parked in the green, the guy standing in the middle of Alpha with his lights, trying to get him into the north hangar. Don't let him get down to don't let him get down to Desert Sky where they might lose the fuel. You know, but North Hangar area is not really good for helicopters. Thank you.
There's no doubt in my mind that Steve is sensitive to all of those issues, and that Pete. Pete, please state your name for the recording.
Okay, Pete LaPlaca is my name. I just want to speak on the safety issue of it. It's just, I've been there for 4 or 5 years, and I see what goes on. We have a lot of student pilots flying in. When they close the taxiway, they force people to back taxi, and you have a lot of people coming in who have no idea where they are or where they're going. I've seen a lot of near misses and incidents, and that just adds to it. So it's mainly the safety factor, not even the FAA factor. It's the safety factor there, because you know what goes on there. It's a free-for-all at times. So, I mean, if they can use the terminal ramp, that's not a problem. But closing that off and running their vehicles up and down there with these student pilots coming in, it's pretty crazy. And we're going to have an incident, and then we're going to lose everything. So that's the only thing I wanted to bring to attention on that.
Thanks, Pete.
All right.
I think that Mr. Johnson and I both now understand by doing further research that we cannot close that portion of Taxiway Alpha for refueling operation without closing the whole entire runway. So the only other option we might have would be to close 3,000 feet of the runway, and then we'd have to mark it with a splash threshold. We'd have to have X's. It would be a catastrophic nightmare to try to comply with that. So I think by the airport design regulations that they allow an airplane to taxi on Alpha, that's fine. It allows aircraft movement, but it's very specific. The instant you park something on that taxiway, it no longer meets the safety requirements for the runway obstacle-free zone. So I think that we now understand, and I'd invite you to hop in here, that we cannot close a portion of Taxiway Alpha without taking things to the runway as well.
I would just add that at the very back end of your packet, you'll see a draft policy in regards to taxiway closures. Take a look at that, and maybe not right now, because, or if you'd like now or later, let me know any changes to that or items that you want adjusted on that.
Let me just read that real quickly for the members of the audience. It says airport taxiways only be closed by the city or the airport in the following situations: emergency situations, emergency maintenance of the taxiway, construction on the taxiway, and special airport aeronautical events such as air shows, air meets, and fly-ins that encompass the whole airport. In the event a taxiway is closed, it must be closed and opened by the city. Prior public notice, if possible, will be issued. The closure is notamed. The closure is messaged on the AWAS system. Adequate signage, barricades, traffic cones, and lighting are placed during closure. Airport FBOs are advised of the closure and opening of the taxiway. The only individuals with the authority to close taxiways are the airport supervisor, the operations director, or the airport maintenance lead. From my standpoint, this pretty much encompasses it. I think it's a, and I know that you've also informed all the people that commercial activities that you're available 24/7 and it will provide other areas for them to conduct a refueling operation without closing a taxiway. If there's no more questions from the board, I would entertain a motion to support staff. Just for those in the audience, the airport board has no authority to tell staff to do something or not to do something. We can make a recommendation to staff, and we make recommendations to the city council through Mr. Sheehy. But the main purpose of having the airport board is to provide the public process so that you folks can come and speak your mind and tell us what you think, rather than just relying on those of us that are interested in the airport to try to make decisions on your best behalf. So having said that, I would entertain a motion to support the staff on this proposed policy.
I second that.
I'll make the motion.
Motion's been made and seconded. Is there any more discussion? If you're ready to vote, please signify by saying aye if you agree.
Aye.
Aye. Unanimously approved. The next item is a presentation and discussion of the airport pre-accident plan. This is something that came up about 8 or 9 months ago. I think we raised some issues here that we didn't know where we had or didn't have a single source document that we could go to tell us, the fire department, the city planners, the police department, what to do in the event of an aircraft accident. Mr. Sayer volunteered to take on this project, and based on the fact that he was a city emergency planner in another life, I can tell you that he spent a lot of hours on this. There are some copies of it that I set in the back so you can pass around and back, and I'll turn it over to Jeff and let you give us a briefing on what you came up with.
Basically, what I did was get with the police and fire departments and got copies of their internal response plans. And what drove this was actually an incident that was off-site, and nobody from the airport was actually contacted or involved with that, and we wanted to remedy that fact. It wasn't because, you know, people didn't figure they were needed. It just never ever happened since the airport's been out where it is, and it was just an oversight. So I did work with the police department and the fire department and with Steve Johnson and his staff, and came up with procedures for military incidents, which we all know we just had one of those recently, and then off-site as well as on-site. It covers the incident command system and who will be involved in that, who will be in charge of the incident, what agencies are to be called, who can notify those agencies, so on and so forth. So it's basically a final draft. I did send it out to both the police and fire department, and I didn't get any negative comments or anything from them. And Steve and his staff also approved it. So
This is a public hearing. Let me open it up to any member of the audience that would like to address the board on this subject. Right behind you first. Please state your name for Crystal.
My name is Ed Weber. The question I have is, after hours, Is there anybody that is monitoring as far as the fire department at the airport or Desert Hills, the 122.7 or 121.5? It's in the event that a pilot had an emergency coming inbound and was to make an announcement on 122.7 after hours or even 121.5, is there anybody that is able to respond to him?
It's my belief that the fire station located at the airport has 22/7 on all the time, and it's a 24-hour day fire station. I don't think they have the emergency frequency up.
Yeah, I would, and this is a guess because I've not asked the question, 121.5, I don't think so. And at 122.7, I would say not all the time. There's some people out there that are pilots that understand, and there are others that don't. So I don't believe they monitor it 24 hours.
Is it possible to have it monitored 24 hours at the fire station and maybe even Desert Hills Fire Station, which is 24-hour manned now? It's not a volunteer fire department anymore. To have them have a radio on 122.7 at all times.
We can look into that.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
my suggestion would be that we talk to the police and fire department, maybe if they're game, have that done in dispatch, because there's people on duty 24 hours a day in the dispatch center. In a fire station, you know, they do sleep at night, so I don't know that putting it, you know, having it on 24 hours a day in a fire station would be the best option. So that would be my suggestion, is get with the police and fire and talk about dispatch.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, can you put that on a list of things that you and I can check into?
Yes, indeed.
Mr. Holmes?
Jim Holmes, pilot, aircraft owner, hangar owner here at the airport. Just a couple of questions. You talked about the on-site and off-site accidents. How far off-site does an accident need to be before Steve's people and maybe our local first responders were not involved?
They're not involved?
Not involved.
It's a municipal airport, so anything within the city limits would fall into that. I know that Desert Hills Fire Department and Lake Havasu Fire Department, they have mutual aid and automatic aid agreements, and they respond together. It's possible that, you know, maybe as far as maybe I-40 and maybe down to the Bill Williams Bridge, at least Steve and his crew might be notified, because I know the fire department, Lake Havasu Fire Department, does respond to those different areas along with Desert Hills. So it's possible that they could implement this plan during an incident like that. And it would be up to Steve to respond. He wouldn't be required because it's outside the city limits.
Okay. Another question, and I concur with what was mentioned earlier, is that if you're coming in on off hours and maybe you're limping in with a bad engine and you're on 122.7, after at least 9 o'clock, I don't think the fire department's going to respond to me. They will?
Yeah, the fire department will respond 24 hours a day as long as they get notified.
Yeah, but out at I think where you're going with this is the station at the airport. They could well be asleep, so the idea of dispatch would take care of that because
Right.
they're open 24 hours.
Right.
Does dispatch have something more than just a receiver?
We need to look into that. Need to
Yeah,
do some
I mean, you need a
research.
transceiver to,
Right.
okay, I was just curious whether that might be, because somebody's having some problems, they need all the help they can get, possibly get on the ground.
Right.
We'll check into it, but my
Right.
best guess is that it'll be cost prohibitive to have somebody other than dispatch 24 hours a day to monitor it. That would be my guess, but that's certainly something we can look into, and it's a good suggestion.
And it could also be that the fire department, that station's out on another type of call, because they do run, accidents on the highway.
Sure.
You know, they take care of all the, commercial buildings and any residential area that's out there. They do run with Desert Hills if they get a structure fire, so it could be they would be out of the station. So that's why I would, not only, you know, they may be asleep at night, which is not always the case, but a better solution, at least to look into. That's why I suggested dispatch center.
Great. Okay, thank you.
This document that's an emergency response plan actually is the framework for who to notify and how to set up a response team for it. And in no way it insinuates that anything was done incorrectly in the past. And this predated the F-16 accident by several months at least. I think that drew more attention to it, that we needed to get some urgency to get it together, but that's the genesis of this. We close the public hearing. Is there more discussion by the board? Cal, can we make a motion to ask staff to put this into the city system for implementation at their discretion?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would ask for it to be a future agenda item, and then the board can make a recommendation at that point, but today was just for the purpose of a presentation.
Okay, thank you. If there's no more discussion, we'll move on to the next item. Presentation and discussion of hangar development RFP status. I'm sorry, it's a presentation and discussion of the rate determination study of the hangars. This was asked to be included by Brian Schultz, and we have it here. Each of you were emailed this. We can provide it to anybody in the audience that you would like. And basically this is just in writing what we talked about a year ago, which was that our per square foot rates are well above anybody else's in the state. And upon advice of the council representative, I think a month ago, we decided that the best thing to do was to provide this information to us, and then when the city council takes this up, either present it through Mr. Sheehy or a board member come and make a presentation to the council, asking them not to raise the hangar rates or the Shadeport rates, to gradually allow us to get back. We are 28 cents a square foot. They're basically 16 cents a square foot at Deer Valley, or at Goodyear, 22 cents a square foot at Deer Valley. So we're almost the most expensive in the state, I believe. So it's a public hearing. Anybody would like to address the board on the issue of hangar rates? It's the hangar lease rates. It does not include the ground rates for hangars that were moved over here that are privately owned. I'm going to close the public hearing. Are there any comments or questions from the board?
Mr. Chair.
Sir.
In follow-up to Mr. Johnson's report, he can forward this over to finance when they're having a discussion right now about the rates, so that it can be included in the consideration before it appears before council, and then we can have the board take different action if something comes from that.
Great.
And in the meantime, we're actually doing a resurvey as we speak. So we should have up-to-date numbers that are maybe a week old in a couple of weeks.
Just for the benefit of the folks here in the audience, we discussed this about this time last year, I think. And because we brought it up and documented it, those rates were not increased this last time. And we'd hope that we can make that happen again this time. We can't pass a resolution saying they won't, because we can't, or even ask the council to say that, because as Councilman Sheehy pointed out, we can't put something binding on the council that's elected today that it would affect the council 4 or 5 years down the road. So I think this is something that every year we have to be cognizant of, and the airport board's got to be proactive and present this stuff to finance for their consideration. Any other comments? So the next item is presentation and discussion of hangar RFP status. This is an issue that was brought up twice in previous meetings by members of the audience who had a desire to build hangars. And it was referred to Mr. Johnson, and I'll turn it over to him now and let him give an overview of where he's at.
There we go. I've been talking with a surveyor, in fact, not a surveyor, a appraiser. We're working through details of the RFP. The first thought was just the property that we had surveyed and appraised in 2014, which is roughly 2.4 acres. There's an idea now afoot of expanding that to some of the tie-down ramp that was mentioned, where some of the heavy helicopters occasionally park and get fueled. That tie-down ramp is over 20 years old, so it could be redeveloped. The other aspect to this as well is going to be the fact that we're starting a master plan, or will be starting a master plan process with public input, heavy public input, shortly, within a month or so. So it's morphed a little bit. The value of the property at the time, 2014, was 16 cents a square foot. The same appraiser would come up, do an appraisal, and the premise there would be that at least the most recent appraisal would be a development fee that we would want to get back from whoever develops the site. And since the economy has improved, and as I say this, I'm not even taking into consideration the price of steel, given that whole dynamic, which just came about maybe about a month or and a half ago. There appears to be a lot of interest up in the site. So I just need to get guidance from above me in regards to what the size of the area is that we're going to have appraised. I've already gotten an estimate on what that appraisal will cost. And then if we're going to add additional property on the north ramp to this, then that would have to be surveyed. Again, that's another cost. And then we move forward on that. But we're narrowing it, but it seems the more we dig into it, the more facts we find. So we're working it through, but it's just taking more time than we thought.
Reference the comments that Mr. Johnson just made. The subject of grant assurances comes up again when it comes to building things at the airport. So this whole process has got to be totally transparent, and it's governed by grant assurances. So we can't take a shortcut and just say, please come and do this. It's got to be step one through, or A through Z all the way. Once again, is there anybody here that would like to make a comment on the request for proposal for hangar construction?
I just have a question on the area of the 2.4 acres. Is that directly across from my hangar there in the dirt area on the north hangars? Is that what
is
you're
correct,
talking about?
yes.
Okay, then you also said it was encompassing some other areas. Where would that be?
The undeveloped area that's just to the north of you, the dirt strip there.
Okay.
And then possibly some of the tie-down ramp that is to the
That should be
east,
to the north.
The north and east of you.
North and east, so you're talking about around the corner.
Yes, the key.
And then where they're fueling the helicopter or
Yes.
parking the helicopters, that area, then back, and then, okay, so will we, whatever you're planning, will we keep our access that we currently have now to the gate? Okay.
Dadgummit. There'll be a taxi lane. Yes, you don't lose access to your hangars.
And where are we going to run our razors? No.
No comment.
Any further comments? Close the public hearing. Any comments from the board members? Let's move on to the presentation discussion of airport revised capital improvement programs, and that's Mr. Johnson.
Okay, it just dawned on me. Did you all get okay, you all have a handout that shows the revised ACIP. So for the audience, again, the dates will sort of change a little bit here because ADOT and FAA all have different fiscal years, and so do we. But right now, the list basically says 2019, FAA, ADOT, local funding, and that's $225,000 for design of Taxiway Alpha, so that's a rebuild. 2020, again, FAA, ADOT, local, $5,875,000 for a reconstruction of Taxiway Alpha. 2019, and this would be an ADOT grant, $500,000, and this is to remove and replace the soil cement across from the north ramp, and I think there's an area up there that's dirt as well. Put that rock that you've seen at the north end of the field, and the reason for that is the soil cement we have up there basically is coming apart. Helicopters taxi over it, and foot-size pieces of this stuff basically go airborne. 2021, again, FAA, ADOT, local, a design of $225,000, excuse me, for an overlay of runway 1432. 2021, ADOT and local, that's design and construct. We basically remove all of the fire hydrants that you've all noticed out there that are out in the AOA, in the airfield, that aren't frangible, that don't belong there. And basically they get replaced with flush mount so that when you go off into a ditch, your prop strike will be the pavement, it won't be the fire hydrant. 2022, ADOT and local, and this is replace the runway 32 Pappies, which are probably about 35 years old, the runway 14 reels, and the runway 32 reels. The reels actually are also the age of the airport, so they're beyond their design life and need to be replaced. And then in 2023, that's the overlay for the runway, and right now we figure that at $8.1 million.
This is a public hearing. Would anybody like to address the board on the subject of the capital improvement list? Seeing none, are any comments from any board members? Let's continue to the final item, which is presentation discussion of airport Unicom. This came up a couple of months ago and was underscored by the F-16 accident. 122.7 was the host frequency for the FA instructor and the students to talk back and forth for the time they were about 40 miles out, I think, or 35 miles out. It was overheard by at least one of our board members, and several of us heard bits and pieces of it. We had no way to record it. If we had had that documentation to provide for the accident investigation, it would have helped. In addition, we have some problems with improper use of our Unicom frequency, and we feel that a recorder would document those and probably cut down on improper use of the Unicom frequency. This is a public hearing. Does anybody have anything that you would like to discuss about this? Mr. Weber.
Name is Ed Weber again. Is there any avenue for the airport to request from the FAA, or actually the FCC, I guess, some relief for our 122.7 that overlaps with Boulder City? We're getting more and more overlap, even in our traffic pattern area, with them up there doing parachute drops and all kinds of other operations up there because they have the same frequency. And I'm wondering if there is any avenue for us to request maybe a change in the frequency so that we don't get overlapped. I think that is a safety factor. When we're making position reports here and you're trying to get a word in edgewise with them up there. So I'm just wondering if there's any avenue that we can try to get relief for that problem.
We can definitely look into it. Boulder in the past, because of all their commercial operations up there, and I'm not even going to consider the skydiving, don't get me started on that. But their commercial operations with Papillon and all that routine, the Grand Canyon flights, they have asked us in the past, will you change your frequency? And my response to that is, how about you change yours? But no, we can look into what it takes. If I recall correctly, and again, this is back when I was in university years ago, I think there are only 5, maybe 6 frequencies for non-towered airports that are out there. And so part of this would be seeing, like we even get, and you've heard this, we get Imperial, believe it or not, which is way out there. And again, it's only on certain days, but yeah, we'll hear some corporate jet going into Imperial. Oh, you're going to have the car ready? So part of this would be figuring out what frequencies aren't in the area that might work. But no, we can look into it.
It would almost be better if we went to 122.9 with the same frequency as Chimawavy, since there's hardly any traffic over there. Thank you.
Anyone else? Close the public hearing. Any comments from any board members? I recommend that you continue to explore the avenue of a low-cost Unicom recording device.
We have a proposal. I'll be running it by my boss after one more phone call with the gentleman. And it looks doable, and it looks right now like it's under $5,000, which keeps us out of the morass of city procurement. It makes it rather simple. So if we can keep that price, and if the product will do what we need to do, I think we might have a winner.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chair?
Sir.
Steve, did you, in your report, I read that we had one about 9 years ago and it failed 7 years ago, so it only works for 2 years?
It was, how can I put this? It was equipment that came out of a casino, and you've probably heard stories about this because we had a bunch of cameras placed in different areas. I don't know if the equipment was made in Romania or what, but it did not last. And so this is a far simpler approach to the issue. And again, unlike that ambitious plan back then, this does not tie to dispatch. It doesn't go down to the city. For now, just trying to keep it local and simple.
Okay. And do you have money in the budget for it?
We will dig the money up, yes.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I think that Mr. Weber's comments, perhaps changing our frequency the same as Chimawavy might make a lot of sense. I defer to Shannon Hicks, who's more actively flight instructing than I am, but at least it would put both traffic patterns on the same frequency.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful. I mean, I think a lot of my students really get distracted with listening to Boulder. It is distracting. And then, of course, I'm sure they're having the same problem. And because we do go over and practice at Chimawavy, which is really close to Lake Havasu, so you switch frequencies, or do you switch frequencies, or do you not switch frequencies is usually my thing. If you don't have 2 radios and can't monitor one or both, you can run into some issues because there is traffic that does go in and out of Chimawavy Airport. So it might be a very convenient, shareable frequency for us and them. So
we'll look into that and report about. If there's no further discussion, that concludes the agenda items. I would entertain any recommendations for future agenda items. Mine would be to refer the airport accident plan to staff as a item. And anything else anybody has? If any of the board members have items that come up through the month, if you will just email them to Crystal Williams, and she can collate them and we can get them added to the agenda. Future meeting is Wednesday, September 19th of 2018. I'd like to say a special thank you to the people that came tonight. We do need your input. I think you've seen that work here tonight. things got brought up that none of us up here thought about that were very good suggestions. So my appreciation for attending. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Without objection, we are adjourned.